Hello, everyone. Oh, I'm so pleased to be back today with a very special friend of mine who's also one of my Neurocycle facilitators. She's certified. She's done all the training with me, and she has such a beautiful story about addiction. I'm not going to steal her show, but she is someone worth listening to, and I know you're going to love this. You're going to love this episode. You're going to learn so much. So, Brenda, welcome. Thank you for joining me today, and I'm really excited to talk to you.
Thank you, Caroline. I am so excited to be joining you. You have been a life changer in my mental health, and I will forever be grateful to you for that.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, I got to know you. Apparently you said we met years ago at somewhere where I was doing a conference. And then 2 years ago, you went through the training and became my facilitator. But before we go into all of that, you're going to talk today about addiction and your story. I'm going to hand it over to you. Do you want to just dive straight in and tell us your backstory and how are you going to help everyone today?
I absolutely will. So addiction was something I never thought I would end up in. I grew up in a home where drug and alcohol abuse was pretty prominent. I didn't realize until as I became an adult that it wasn't as normal as I thought. And so it was just something I knew alcoholism was something that was never going to be a problem in my life. But then I just realized at some point in my adulthood, I'd been chasing happiness and chasing that sense of fulfillment because of what I'd experienced as a child. I had these preconceived notions of what success looked like and what happiness looked like. And I kept striving for it and then realized at about 38, I had everything I had checked off my list. I wanted a family and a husband and I had my dream job, my home, and I wasn't happy. And I didn't know what to do with that. And I just remember feeling like almost like Jack and the Beanstalk, where I sold everything for a bag of beans that weren't getting me anywhere. And about that time, work was starting to get a whole lot more stressful. And it seems like sometimes when work would be going good, home might be a little bit stressful, or if home was stressful, work was great. And I just happened to enter a stage where both were stressors at the same time. And so I started having a glass of wine after work just to kind of decompress and unwind. And it grew gradually to a point where I don't remember it becoming a problem. Just at one point I stopped and realized, wow, this is a problem. And I was an educator and we're held to a higher standard. And I knew I was in trouble, but I didn't know where to get help because I was afraid that if I came out and tried to seek help, that it would be looked at with shame and disgrace. And so I kind of stayed trapped. But unfortunately, it came to a point where it just all started to unravel and life imploded. I tried to commit suicide and that's put me into rehab. And so everything that I had run from, mental health, addiction, as a child, I found myself looking in the mirror at everything that I didn't want. And I was in a whole heap of mess. So I went into rehab, which instead of recovery, it's almost, I joke that it's called discovery, because you discover all of the reasons why you were almost prone to addiction. I hate to use that word, or predispositioned for it. I had alcoholism in my family. So hereditary, people were saying, well, it's a wonder. It's not surprising you became an alcoholic. Mental illness was in my family. So I had doctors telling me, well, depression is a disease and it's not that unlikely that you would have fallen prone to that as well. So I was being fed a bunch of misinformation. It didn't feel comfortable for me. Doctors were told me that I had damaged my brain with alcohol use disorder and that this was probably going to be my lot in life because I didn't have alcohol to numb the pain. I was going to be on antidepressants the rest of my life. And that depression was a disease. And I just remember this didn't seem like this was the end.
Seems such a hopeless outlook, doesn't it? Totally.
It was. And here I'm thinking that now I have all this pain that I've uncovered. I have nothing to mask or numb the pain. So I felt like I was sitting in a pile of mess. And I began to realize why relapse was such an issue. Or, you trade one addiction for another, which you often hear. because being well was important to me. So I started looking for answers everywhere. And I remember I found the solution in a Barnes and Noble bookstore because everything the doctors had said didn't sit well with me. I had a spirituality that said that there was more to life for me than what I had and that there were answers out there. And I remember being in the self-help section of a Barnes and Noble and coming across your books. And I picked the first one up. This was the first one that I came across, and I picked it off the shelf. And I started leafing through it, and where, switched off my brain, I found myself in these pages.
Wow.
And I was like, oh my gosh. So what this scientist is telling me is that we're all a collection of stories, good, bad, and everything in between. And that even though we may have been predispositioned to trauma and built toxic memories into our brains, that didn't define who we were and that we had the ability to change those. And then when I came across this book next, this was really the game changer for me. This showed up at my church. I think we were looking at maybe doing a Bible study around it because it was scripture and science kind of meshing together. And I just remember feeling like I had found gold. And I felt like I had found hope in a hopeless situation. And that's really when I started to heal. And that was years ago before there was any Neurocycle app and the systems that you have put in place now to really tackle mental health is just where you've brought this is phenomenal. And I'm just so happy to be a part of it.
Oh, thank you, Brenda. Thank you for sharing that. And I'm so happy that you found this. When you said Barnes and Noble, I thought, that's great. Then you pull up that book. Well, that's lovely. And I remember, you shared that with me before, but, thank you for telling me again and for telling the audience. And it's amazing how a book can help one. But what's more important is is the content and how that helped you. I want to ask you a few kind of deep questions around this. So you obviously, you found that information and you looked, you started searching, and you started searching and you made a change, but that obviously was not easy. So you made a comment to me just before we started, and this is something that we've had chances, obviously, over time because of the training and so on for you to chat. But you said something that really caught my attention. It's almost like the pivotal point of what I want to focus on today, and that is that you went to rehab and you were literally told that you couldn't change. Now, I've had so many patients and clients over the years that have told me the same thing. And even family members and cousins and that kind of thing that have experienced the same thing. And not that we're trying to bash rehabs here. We have to have it. It's so important. And it's not every rehab has that philosophy, but I've heard this way too often. Can you elaborate on what you mean by that and how that affected you and what did you do about that?
Oh, that's a great question. And you're right. Now all rehabs are painted with the same brush. There's really great ones out there, but my particular program for me, it left me wanting for more. And it almost made me feel shameful for being and doing what I'd done. And almost like you did it to yourself. And, these are the choices that you made. And there's such a stigmatism around addiction to begin with. And, I wasn't your classic, addiction. I was an educated woman, 38, 40, and I didn't look like anybody in the program on top of all of that. Mm-hmm. And so that was really difficult. But yes, there was just this where I happened to be, it was almost like a disease model where depression is a disease, anxiety is a disease, addiction is a disease. And that's how they chose to treat it. Mm-hmm. And I really feel like what you have brought to the mental health arena is another place for more conversation. We can do better. We should be doing better. And the research is showing so much that there's opportunities here that we have yet to grab hold of and seize.
That's amazing. And you said though that you felt that one of the things you were told was that you couldn't change. You felt like you had no hope.
Right. I had damaged my brain because of the amount of alcohol that I had drank and over the time that I had done that. Because I'd gone into blackout stage with drinking, and that because I had done that, I had damaged parts of my brain that were I just wasn't going to be well again.
And that was what you were told, and that's based on what you were told. And that's based on the disease model. Can you talk about the disease model and why that, and what is the truth, or what, let me ask this again, sorry. Can you explain what it means, that the disease model of addiction and depression and things mean? And then what is the actual truth about what depression and addiction is? How do you, from the scientific research?
Right. Because we're looking at it from a disease model, then we have to treat it with medications and a system instead of being able to it's like when you think about a disease model, there's no cure. So I was told I was literally told, because of my brain not being able to produce, I'm going to call them the feel-good chemicals, such as the endorphins and serotonin, because of the alcohol and even the antidepressants, that my brain could no longer produce those chemicals on its own. It was going to need help to do that because I had really flooded it with I've damaged it. So that I really, in order to feel that level of peace and normalcy, I guess you would call it, I was going to need the antidepressants because my brain could no longer produce those chemicals on their own. And that I'd really put it into a toxic state. And I just was like, that can't be all there is. And so when I came across your books and some of the gold that I discovered was learning that it was my thoughts that were driving my behavior. And it was actually my thoughts that were making me physically sick. So when I was experiencing symptoms of anxiety and I would go into a panic attack and my heart would be racing, I'd feel pain shooting down my arm, I thought I was in a full-blown heart attack. And at one point, I was actually hospitalized, taken by an ambulance to the hospital. I thought I was having a heart attack. And what it was the hypothalamus just flooding my system with adrenaline and these negative stress chemicals that were physically making me sick. And so when I started to learn those things from your research, I realized that my biology hadn't predestined me for addiction or depression. It was my toxic thought life that had put me where I was. And your work said that I could be my own microsurgeon and I could change it all if I was willing and if I was willing to do the work. That's what I would like to get into the rehab centers. That's what I would like people struggling with addiction to know, that, you might not have had a great start, but you can have a fantastic finish. And there's ways to do it. And you've provided the science.
Wow, that's very powerful that you personally, you've been there, done it, got the t-shirt, and you were told that there's no hope. You were told that your brain was diseased. But was there ever any work around that, finding the root cause? Because the biomedical model basically says you are diseased. You have, this is who you are. And this is who you are the rest of your life. And you have to control it with other substances because that's broken. Whereas what you've now learned is that actually there was a reason why that addiction isn't a disease, it's a behavior.
Right.
Signal. It's a behavioral signal telling you something. Can you talk a bit about that? About what addiction is and how you learned and how that changed? What did you do? Well, because you're saying a lot of things that are so wonderful. You're saying things, and I want the listeners to really hear this. You're saying things like you chose to look for another way. You chose to recognize that was not hopeful. You chose to do the research. You chose to see this in a different way. There was a lot of you choosing to get more knowledge and you choosing to maybe look at this thing differently. And so there's a lot of free will involved in the process and learning new knowledge, and new knowledge helping you to reformulate and reconceptualize how you looked at addiction. Could you talk through that process and explain how you see addiction now, having gone through this experience? What changed you? How did you get out of it? That makes sense.
Well, I remember your body of research teaches us that you think, feel, choose, but everything starts with a thought. And I never knew how powerful my thoughts were. But I had wired in a lot of negative thoughts. I had wired in my thoughts about how I felt about mental health, how I felt about alcohol, how I felt about, I had experienced rejection as a child. So I felt like in order to be successful and accepted, I had to earn it. So that created this perfectionist attitude in me. And so I remember reading in your work that we're going to show up in life in 4 ways: our emotions, our behaviors, our attitudes, and our bodily sensations. And so I wasn't showing up in life in any way that I really liked. What looked good on the outside, especially in my professional realm, I put up a good face, but inside I was a hot mess. And, I'd go home at night, and that's where I could be the real me. But even there, it wasn't good. I was controlling my family. I was controlling my kids. If something didn't go right, mom wasn't happy. And when mom wasn't happy, nobody was happy. I had created a toxic home because my life and my thoughts were toxic. And so I was in such pain. The only way I could kind of escape and numb that pain and kind of almost get away from my own self was when I started to drink that glass of wine. And all of a sudden, I would feel this sense of warmth come across me, and I could start to breathe and start to decompress. And I started to like that feeling, but it wasn't getting me anywhere. And so I understood what brought me to addiction, because I was showing up in life in ways that were not good. And it was all generated by my thought life. And so I knew in order to change the outcome, I had to change the input, the source of where everything was coming from.
So well explained. So in other words, what you've explained is that the addiction was one of those 4 signals. It was the behavioral signal. And the way we wrap in life are those, the emotions, and they never work separately. They always work together. So your behavior addiction was linked to emotions and had emotions attached to it. As you said, you got, frustrated with the family and you'd created a toxic home. So the addiction is a behavior that has emotions attached to it, that has perspectives. There's a whole perspective of how you look at life. And then there's obviously then, as you said, you experience it in your body with a lot of the panic attacks and that kind of thing. And what you've said, I'm just underscoring this, and correct me if I've said anything, or if I have misunderstood you, but you had to find the source of your thought. Now, when you were in the rehabs, did you ever get taken to the point, because in any of the therapies, did you ever get taken to the point of where the thought is the source, or was it always just, this is the disease, this is forever? And
not really. The one thing that I did have a phenomenal counselor that gave me some freedom, in the sense that she said, Brenda, you have your expectations of the people around you. They do not have the capability of meeting those expectations. So you either going to have to change your expectations, because they're not going to change. And that's the only way that you're ever going to find happiness. And there was a lot of truth in what she said to me, but it still went back to my thought life that I had to find out why I had such expectations of the people around me.
Exactly.
So, and I was in a year-long program. It was an outpatient program, and I went 3 days a week. But when it ended. And it was just like, that was the end of the support. And so, I did relapse two years later. And that's when I was in the bookstore looking for answers, because I said, this isn't working. I'm not any further ahead. I owe it to my children to figure this out. And I owe it to myself, because I had created this beautiful life for myself and my family, and it all had imploded. And I remember as a kid always feeling a little bit embarrassed by my mom's mental health. And it was almost like the family secret. And the fact that I knew my mom had tried to commit suicide when I was little, right, and that I had put my children through that, I thought, Brenda, you've got to figure this out, because you're better than this. Your children deserve more, and there's answers. And that's why I said, when I found your work, your body of work, it was a game changer for me. And 15 years later, I haven't looked back. Neurocycling has become a lifestyle for me.
You've been doing that for years. And one of the big aspects that I know I can ask you is like you did the work of change, but you were told that your brain was diseased. So what was the big key? And I'm going to throw the word out, neuroplasticity. Can you talk about how was that a key factor in your journey?
Yes. Yes, I love that, because this was pre-Neurocycle app, most of the time, I probably was doing it all wrong, but it didn't matter. It still was working, because you had outlined the 5 steps so beautifully. And what I gleaned from this is that you have to think about your thinking. You are the gatekeeper to your thoughts. And I remember one part of your book said, when something comes up, when you bring this thinking to the surface that is toxic, you have the choice right then and there to decide, do I want this to be a part of me? And if I don't, then right then and there, while it's up and it's in my conscious mind, I can replace it with truth. I can replace it with the truths about me and what I'm capable and able to do and rewire that. So again, it was pre-app, so I was probably very clunky with it, but it still worked. And it probably took me longer than maybe it does nowadays. So everybody that haven't started the app, start the app. You have no idea the gift that Dr. Leaf has put into your hands. But I took those 5 steps and I journaled. I did a lot of journaling and I thought about what I was thinking. And if it didn't line up with what I wanted in my mind or who I wanted to be, I would just dismiss it and replace it with a new healthy thought. And it took time, but I am such a different person nowadays.
So that's the thing. It took time and you're a different person. I mean, talking 15 years later, as you said, it's pre-app. It was pre even the web version. We had the book, we had the web version, and then we had the different versions of the app. And now you're a facilitator all these years later. But Brenda, what would you say is key into like the neuroplasticity aspect, that the fact that you with your mind change your brain is 2 key things that I'm picking up. You're saying a lot of I chose, and that's so pivotal. You can help someone, and you just think of rehabs, think of the people that you're helping. I think of the patients I've worked with, think of people, the families helping their families. You can help someone and you can be there as they change, but you can't make them change. But when someone chooses, then they can change. So the choices is a huge thing.
Choice.
And then the other aspect is that we can change, that your mind does change your brain, but that takes time and that whole healing journey. And you've talked about a 15-year journey, and you've spoken about relapses. And this is the pattern of it, that people who are told that you have a disease, addiction is a disease, your brain will never change. There's no hope in that. Meanwhile, the truth is that addiction is not a disease. Addiction is a behavior. And it's a behavior that you are using to try and cope with something that you can't cope with. And until you find that story and you reconstruct that story, it's never going to go away, but you can reconstruct the story so that you can live with it. That addiction will always be a coping mechanism. And once you do that, then the addiction actually then goes away, which is what's happened in your case. Addiction, you're no longer addicted to alcohol because you out and restructured the story. So you're not trying to numb a behavior. You're not trying to numb an emotion with a behavior. You've reconstructed and now you are moving forward. So you use neuroplasticity. And the key thing with neuroplasticity is that your brain is always changing anyway. So you were changing whether you were drinking the alcohol or not. You were changing, but in the addictive, in using it in an addictive behavior, you were changing in the wrong direction. Whereas once you started changing it to rewire all of that and change in the right direction, but you can do it. That's the key thing. I've said a lot there. Do you want to translate what I've said and kind of explain into your personal experience? Because I know people would love to know, how did you, Dr. Lisa said all this stuff. How did you, Brenda, do that? I know you can't tell 15 years, but what did you do? What did your day look like? How did a day look like for you as you started gaining this insight that, hey, I can choose to rewire, to restructure. I can find my source and maybe talk about what that source was. A little bit of your journey and the ups and the downs. And what did you do when you fell and when it was hard and when you just wanted to give up again? And can you talk a little bit about that journey?
That's great. Well, being a teacher, you have a very, very busy life. And so I actually would neurocycle often at night. And I would go through the process and almost decompress and think about how the day went. And I'd go through all the 5 steps. And the last step is the active reach, where you decide you're going to have a statement that replaces any negative thoughts that have gone through your head through that day. That active reach sticks with you. So I'd like to neurocycle at night. So then, because I knew my mornings were going to be busy, I still had children that were growing. But when I would wake up in the morning, I'd have my active reach already ready. So I would just review my notes and be ready to start my day. And then I love that I would just, as things would come up, there's so many tools that I would learn. I would I would say, is that the truth about me? Or I would come up with 3 things that would counteract the one negative thing I was thinking. But I was always saying, why are you thinking what you're thinking? And as for every time I would bring that into my my conscious mind, I could just say, yep, that's part of me. Nope, I'm going to reject that. That's not me. But because I would start my day already with my active reach and I was almost like armed and ready for the day. And then because it was become such a lifestyle that if I started to feel a little stressed during the day, I could just pause and say, okay, you're feeling stressed. I'm recognizing it in your body. Your heart is racing. You're feeling a little sweaty. You're feeling angry. What triggered you? And sometimes I would just have to stop and really back it up a little bit and then maybe back it up a little bit further and look at the source. And then just kind of just go through the steps of, all right, I'm gathering awareness. I'm taking my internal cues. I'm also reading my 5 senses. I'm taking in the information. I'm asking myself, why? So you have permission to be a 4-year-old. You know how 4-year-olds will ask you a question, you answer it and they say, why? And you answer it and they say, why? Give yourself a permission to be a 4-year-old. And you just start going deeper and deeper and deeper. And then you get to the point where you've just got all of this information in front of you. And then you think, you've thought, you're feeling everything. And you say, okay, I'm choosing to go forward with a different decision. I'm not going to react in this way. I'm not going to let my behavior show up this way. I'm choosing to put that thought aside, replace it with this one, and make a bet. And it's freeing. You are the gatekeeper, and it is so empowering. I never knew that this was possible. I wish I knew it as a child, which is why I love the signs that you have showing up behind you. Because as an educator, predominantly in the education elementary realm all these years, I want to see parents and teachers using this with children, because I think the outcome of my life would have been so different had I known how to do this at a younger age.
That's amazing. So you would do the little mini neurocycles during the course of the day. Brenda, I do that too. Sometimes something will happen. I get a phone call and I'm about to maybe do an interview or something, or I see an email, I get a text and it throws me off. I'll do the neurocycle to get myself back on track in the space, and then I can focus in on what I'm doing. So it's such a great tool for just managing your mind during the course of the day as well. The whole thing is it's a system. You can use all the great techniques, because you've got a lot of techniques that you were using prior to the, learning about what I'm doing, and you've learned about other stuff. So the neurocycle is not a technique, it's a system. And we are systems, as humans, we're systems. So this is the system of how you catch the thought, and you catch how you're showing up and track it back to the thought, deconstruct, reconstruct, and then stabilize into a habit. And it happens over time. And there's that healing journey. So two little questions, two big questions. First of all, I want to talk about your root thought that actually led to the addiction. And then and how long that maybe took you, how many cycles, how many years, and sort of the stages. And obviously you don't have to go into absolute every detail. Just give us a big picture. Yeah. And in terms of the timing, the habit, the stabilization, the 63-day concept, I'd love you to talk about that and in your life. And I know you work with clients and helping them to how key that is. Well, how key is it? I'd love you to talk about that. So let's start with as you did the work, as you so beautifully described. What was the cause? You mentioned in the beginning that you were very stressed, and sometimes at home and at work, and combination, but there was more to it than that, because that's we all battle with that day to day. Everyone's battling. Most people, 95% of every day is kind of stressful for most people, according to research. So there's a level of normal, just being alive stress. And then there's the level of stress that tips you over into alcoholism and potential suicidal attempts and so on and that kind of stuff. So and as you so rightly said, there was a thought, and it was until you had found that source. Up until that point, the rehabs and the therapies and so on were band-aids until you found the source. So you went through that process you've described. Do you mind sharing with us how long it took you to find the thought, and what was it?
Not at all. My very first neurocycle was actually probably too big of a question, or too big of a toxic thought, because it was, I need to earn love, which really is a huge statement. And the beautiful thing about the neurocycle process is that once you do your first neurocycle, it's almost like peeling back an onion, and you start to see layers of hurt and layers of toxic thinking. And so I started with, I need to earn love. But that was too big. And so I went through that first neurocycle with it. But then I started to neurocycle topics like, I have to be perfect in order to be loved. And so it really was a process. And because we didn't yet have the app, it was a lot of journaling and a lot of metacog, drawing my thoughts on paper. And what surprised me with the metacog is sometimes I wouldn't necessarily feel that thought in my head, but I could see it on paper. And paper didn't lie, because a lot of what I loved about the process is when I would metacog, I would just metacog freely and just let the thoughts flow. And that's when I would go back and look at it, and I would notice things to say, wow, I didn't know I felt that way. Or I didn't see that was inside of me. But because you just do it so free flowing. And so those were the things. And it was a process, because feeling that you have to earn your love is rooted in a lot of different deep-seated toxic thoughts and hurts. Just the thought that you don't have worth and value just on the surface, that you're lovable. And so I had to figure out what was inside of me that made me feel that I wasn't lovable. Because I knew I had a husband that loved me. I knew I had children that loved me. I had friends. But the bottom line is I didn't love me. And I had to get to the root cause that I didn't love me, and I didn't think I was worthy, and I didn't think I was valuable. And I think, unfortunately, a lot of rejection as a child from my mom, and my dad. And so never really, not knowing why I wasn't loved or didn't feel loved, and it's not that they didn't love me, but they were dealing with their own mental health issues and their own abuse issues. And I think sometimes parents end up not being present enough for their children. And again, it's all about the perspectives and attitudes that we develop based on what we're experiencing. And that becomes our truth. It becomes how we think and feel. And because I really don't think my parents wanted me to feel that way, but they weren't always 100% present because of what they were going through. And because of that, I grew up feeling rejected and unloved a lot of the times.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. And that is the case. It's not like, and I'll just reiterate what you're saying. A lot of stuff happens in childhood. And I mean, I'm a parent of 4, you're a parent of, how many children have you got, Brenda? 2. So between the two of us, there's 6 children, and there's lots of moms listening to this, and we all deal with parent guilt. And we're not sitting here trying to say, we're perfect parents and our parents weren't, kind of thing. My parents made mistakes. Yours did. We've made mistakes. You've made whatever, and our kids will make mistakes. The whole thing is the ability to recognize that our parents did the best that they could under the circumstances. In the majority of cases, they are really truly bad, abusive parents, and we have the right to recognize and honor that they had their set of things that they brought into the parenting situation, but we also have the right to deal with that impact. So it's not like you're trying to blame everything on your parents, because there's a huge problem, as you and I both know, and we've discussed this in meetings, in social media too. Everything's my parent, victim mentality. It was all my parents' fault, and I have attachment issues because of my parents. Listen, we're all doing what we can. 99.9% of parents are doing the best that they can with what they have. But at the same time, we have to honor our children, recognizing that what we did, some of it is amazing, some of it has been a problem. So we have the right to honor our parent, but we also have the right to honor ourselves and deal with that impact. So it's not a blame game. And I want to stress that what Brenda is saying here is that she honors the fact that her parents had issues too, and that they did good and some great stuff and some stuff that had this negative impact. And she recognizes where that comes from. But she has the right to work on the impact on her life. And it did impact her life, because she ended up becoming addicted to alcohol, because she felt that she was not good enough and had to prove her love and all that kind of thing. But that's definitely not a disease. And that's definitely not something that has to be you do not have to turn into a victim and then, make your parents into this terrible bad person. That doesn't have to be the case either. So what you're saying is and that's what we're trying to do here, is create a system where we stand back honestly and truly and look at ourselves and look at our behaviors. Do we have addictive patterns in our life? And if an addictive pattern is simply a behavior that's being used to try and suppress the pain of something that is so cool. And it's generally something that really attacks your core. Like you said, as you said, you've got to prove that you're lovable. I think that was the paraphrase of what, and that's like the cool that we love to be loved. I mean, we live in love and we come from love. So that's an absolute core thing. So something happened at some formative stage of your life that created it. It reminds me of one of my patients that I had, and she's given me permission to share this, obviously without her name, but went through a similar situation where parents seemed like a great family and 4 kids, 3 boys, 1 girl. But the father was quite strict, religious, whatever, and very into, spent a lot of time with the boys. And there was, like, the boys had sports or whatever. So boy things were very praised. So the girl who was the youngest felt in order to be really loved by her dad, she had to become like a boy, and rejected herself and felt she wasn't lovable. And, she kind of developed she sort of became quite aggressive and that kind of thing. And one day she was sitting, and she was about 3 or 4, and she was sitting in a restaurant with her parents and family, and some friend came in and looked at the kids and said, "Oh, didn't know that," hadn't seen him for a while, didn't know that the 4th child was a girl, and turned around and said, "Oh, what a cute little boy," and whatever. And something about that statement completely threw her off. But it took at least 2 years of therapy to actually, and neurocycling. So it was about 12 neurocycles, so 6 per year, because it's 63 days in neurocycle, for her to work out that what caused it. But her addictive behaviors from very young, she started from 12, 13, drinking, a lot of sexual promiscuity, doing everything to drown it. By the time, multiple suicide attempts, she survived and whatever, but just showing that that's the parents didn't even realize by the time it got to that point, and now functional married life, but she had to find that root cause. And this is what you're saying. When someone has addictive behaviors, and I'd love you to comment on this, because I know you being in rehab and being what you're doing, you've probably got 1,000 stories that you can share that are similar, how there can be a statement that can be from even a well-intentioned statement. That person wasn't out there to wreck that kid's life, but it was a statement said in the child's vulnerable state. And this can happen. Who can predict these things? But this is why it's so important we start from young, which is why I wrote this book that you can see behind me, why you said what you said, why we have to have rehabs that deal with these things, that we teach parents and children and grandparents and teachers how to help a child. If that child was able to say, "I'm sad," because if they were able to have a way of expressing that in some way, which is why I've developed Neurocycle, how to help parents help children and so on, which is what you were saying. Yes, I'm using this long story, and I don't know if you'd like to elaborate on that, but I'm just trying to help people understand that there can be a statement that can be well-intentioned, or there could be major abuse. And any combination of anything can lead to whatever, but it's not a disease. There's something, and you have to find that something, and it's going to take time, and there's going to be ups and downs. Do you want to comment on that?
I do, definitely. Well, and I do want to say that I think one of the banner days for me is the time when I could no longer be on antidepressants, and because I knew that wasn't my lot in life, and that I had healed so much that I was no longer depressed. I wasn't showing those symptoms, but I wanted to say that. And I also wanted to go back to it because I spent so many years as a teacher. I've seen this in children. And you know what? We have to honor our perceptions of self. Mm-hmm. And like that, I know my parents did the best they could, but I had developed perceptions that were my own perceptions and perceptions of self. And I've seen this play out again and again in classrooms with children. I seem to always was given the most difficult children, but they were never the most difficult in my room. Because I would spend time talking to kids. But I always said to anybody who misbehaved in my room, I never believed that a child got up and got on the bus to say, "I'm going to go in and have the worst day possible in school."
Exactly.
They come to school to be educated and loved and honored. And so when a child was misbehaving in my room, I would spend time building a relationship with that child so that we could have conversations that might be a little bit difficult. And a lot of times it would come down to they didn't feel good about themselves. Mm-hmm. They didn't think the others around in the room loved them or liked them, but they didn't like themselves much either. And so a lot of times the behavior was attention-seeking behavior, because even bad attention was attention. Mm-hmm. They didn't often know how to seek good attention, a lot of times because of what their home life was like. Mm-hmm. But I think we have to honor people's stories and honor where people are coming from. And that's why the neurocycle process is so important, because I think sometimes people don't know what they even think about themselves. Mm-hmm. They just know that they're hurting. they're hurting. Their identity is under attack. And they're just so sad, and that everything's coming out as symptoms and signals, warning signals of an underlying problem. But a lot of times it's self-worth and valuing themselves and feeling good enough. And because I remember telling my husband one time, because I had come to a point where I was so excited about this work, and I started sharing it with people. And I remember coming home really frustrated that I felt like I had been talking to a brick wall. I was talking to somebody about this process. And I realized that, the person I was talking to really wasn't interested in changing.
That's key. We spoke about that earlier on.
People are as happy or as miserable as they want to be. And I remember coming home and telling my husband, why wouldn't you seek happiness? And as he and I processed that and talked about it, I realized, you know what? She probably just didn't feel worthy of change. Worthy and valuable. And so that's a whole nother layer that I'm just, with the nonprofit Day One of Sobriety, that I just really want to tap into, because people are hurting everywhere, and they just want, and mental health could be doing, we have to start doing better.
Yeah.
We're pigeonholing people into different disease models, and we're not looking at the whole person and the whole beautiful capabilities of people and their amazing brains and what they're capable of doing, and empowering people to just, I would love to have a mental wellness system and then instead of a mental health system. And I'm just excited about just doing better in my own little piece of the world, in the lives that I touch, just shining the light on bringing people happiness and wellness.
Oh, that's beautiful, Brenda. And I love that you said that there's people need to find the source, and that these children and adults, and it's so often a self-worth issue. There's always a source. And what's so important as well in the current mental health system is there's some amazing therapies and things out there that are helping people become more aware, and helping with the breathing and meditation with the neurophysiology and becoming aware. But if you just aware and you just calm down your neurophysiology, but you don't deconstruct and reconstruct and reconceptualize and stabilize into a new thought, what you've done is you bring something up, you become aware, but then if you don't fix it, it actually goes back stronger than before. And I think that's what's happening a lot.
Yes.
Therapy goes back. You got to do the process.
Yes, I have to share. I remember I had a client, I know she wouldn't mind me sharing this with you, but we started down the neurocycle process and the path. And I think we were about day 7. It was the first week in, and she had been in a lot of therapy. And she said to me, Brenda, I don't want to bring up all of this painful past again. I've done it time and time again in so many different situations. And it always just leaves me feeling hopeless and worse off. And I remember your example so many times of flying the plane. And I said to her, I know. I said, so many times you've flown, you've gotten in the plane and you've put it in the air with no plan to land it. And it's crashed and it's been awful. I said, but if you stick with me, I promise you.
We'll fly. And
yes, we will fly and we will land, and you will have taken care of this mess once and for all. And you will be in a much better place, and you will have started down a path of healing that you haven't seen before. And it did. I remember we got to day 63, and it's almost like I want to take before and after of people, because it's almost like before and after weight loss, where the change is so noticeable. But the before and after of a person's facial expressions. Sometimes when you're starting, there just seems to be such despair and not a lot of life. And at day 63, it's just life and hope and eagerness. And it's incredible to see what this does for people. I just love it.
And walking, I love that you said that. And when you're flying, I mean, just think of it. There's so much turbulence that will happen in that flight. You're going to be up and down, up and down. But if you know that there's turbulence and you know that this is part of the journey, it makes it so much more real. Let's talk about this thing quick. Just last question, and then we'll, because we've already been going for quite a while. But last question, let's talk about why the 63 days and how you've seen that in your own life, the cycles, the cycles of why we need to fly the plane for the full 63 days and not just take off and land in the same day kind of thing. And
yes, that's great. And that's what I tell the clients that I work with. I said, you're going to do a lot of heavy lifting for 21 days. But at day 21, you're going to find some gold and it's going to make you feel like $1 million. And you're going to do the heavy lifting. And then for the rest, for until day 63, you're just going to practice that reconceptualized thought, and you're going to cement it into your brain with that new thought. It's like when you go to the gym, your muscles are sore. It doesn't feel good, but you get to that point where you've got your body back in shape and you're just going to stay on that regimen. We're going to do some heavy lifting and some hard work for 21 days, but then you're just going to keep practicing those new thoughts and the new tools and the new strategies. And they do. And when they get to the end of that 63 days, they feel so empowered and so proud of themselves. And they want to do another one. They're ready to start. Yes. Health seems possible. Hope now possible.
When you think of it, you were 15 years. So as you did one cycle, you realize that that's connected to this. So then you work on another thought and then you realize that's connected. And then new things happen, which then bring something else out. So we're talking about mind management as a lifestyle. And that's what's potentially missing. So that therapy and rehabs can become revolving doors instead of evolving processes. And we also have to have self-empowerment. We have to help people have to make the choice, but we have to help people get to that point of making that correct choice and then staying in the game. Because a lot of people think, well, I've done a few weeks, I'm day 14, around about 2 weeks in, 3 weeks in, people can feel like I've got this, but you haven't got this. That kind of thing. It's to know the system. There's the system that your mind, brain, body network needs to go through to work out the addictive pattern and then to break it down and then to build a new healthy pattern. Because addictions is spoken of as though it's a bad thing, but we're actually addicted to love. And so anything that is distorted versions of that, that's we are driven to operate in that mode. So when addiction becomes distorted, it becomes the opposite of that and becomes these distortions. Brenda, I've got some exciting news for you and for everyone, in that we've got our 63-day challenge coming up in January 25, January through March. And Brenda will be part of this and we'll be sharing, and we'll be working through like specific examples and send us in your queries and your questions and things that you'd like us to work through. And so you'll be seeing Brenda again. And Brenda, this has been amazing. Thank you so much for sharing your experience and your wisdom. And, I'm glad we're going to be talking a lot more and helping people a lot more together through this medium thank you for being with me today.
Oh, it has been my pleasure. And I'm just so thankful for all of the work that you're doing in this mental health arena. And I'm just know that more and more is coming, because you are passionate about helping people, and you've helped me tremendously. Thank you so much, Caroline.
Thank you so much. It's when people feedback that it just inspires me to carry on spending the hours doing the research. And Brenda, you've got a webpage and you've got an Instagram handle. What are they so people can find you?
I do. It's day1ofsobriety.org. I chose to go with the word sobriety, not just because it's for recovery from addiction, but also because the true meaning of sobriety is a sober mind. And a sober mind is a mind that is calm, sound, in self-control. And so I really wanted to kind of tear down a little bit, take a swipe at taking the stigmatism away from addiction and sobriety, because sobriety is the presence of a sound mind, and a sober mind is a well-balanced mind. So day1ofsobriety.org, Instagram and Facebook as well.
And you'll also find Brenda on our app under the Find a Facilitator. She's a fully qualified Neurocycle certified facilitator. So if you want to do any one-on-one sessions with Brenda, you can reach out there. You can also send a query out to info.drleaf.com. However, you can find Brenda if you need the help, and we'll put the link in the show notes as well. Thank you for joining us today, everyone. Thank you, Brenda.
Thank you.